So I have roll call everybody at 6:55. We have a very similar format to what we did last year. I thought that was pretty successful in conveying what we wanted to. So you have two reports here, one that says FY24, that was last year's. FY25, that will be what we are going to propose today, okay? One thing I'll say up front, August 20th is the last date for the budget hearing. Our board meeting happens to be on August 20th, so kind of got to leave today with an approval on this stuff. We have to discuss for as long as we need to, we will. For us, this has always been one that's never been an issue because it's pretty black and white what we can and what we can't ask for. I hope at the end of this, you'll understand why I'm proposing or recommending what we are recommending for this. And, you know, the discussions will be pretty straightforward. So Jason, if you will, if you go down, I'll drive this guy. I'll be in this item right here. Okay, so you see the recommended amounts there on 2024-25 for our proposed amounts. I have a spreadsheet that I put together that I'll go through what each one means and why and how that will affect the taxpayers with your decision today. The first two are what I've handed you so you can look at those separate from this item right here.
Oh, it's fine, man.
Yeah, this isn't gonna go for me, is it? Okay. All right. Hopefully this is going to work. I need to adjust this. You guys see it. If you guys can log in and also look at it, that would be great. Got everything on that side right there. Left, first gray column is your fiscal year 23-24 budget. So this is what we approved last year in the gray. I'll go across the board. General budget last year, $3,739,184. Okay. This year in March, we had a preliminary. That's the next blue column of $3,749,834. You can see the difference is about $10,000. That is our base budget without a vote. Okay. Basically, for the general budget, our base budget is 100% salaries and benefits. We only increased $10,000 from last year, but we did give a 3.3% increase. Last year, we were about $100,000 of salary expenditures into impact aid. So I would project probably around $230,000 to $260,000 next year, based on the decisions that we made in the spring. The real issue here isn't the expenditures. If you kind of extrapolate those back, I'll show you down lower. We probably would have had roughly $100,000 added to the general budget, but in the end, A and B is what created that amount to be about $10,000 in addition to last year. So we're running on essentially the same budget as we had last year, $10,000 increase, and I'll kind of explain to you guys why. But at the end of the pot, you know, we had some salaries in ESSER, we had salaries in impact aid, or in tuition in Title I. At the end of it, it all flows into impact aid, and that's the last catch-all bucket for those expenditures to happen. So we'll try to manage those as we go through, but I'll go down this list and explain to you what we're looking at for each one. And then the second spreadsheet down below is kind of going to show you what the property tax requirements are, and it's interesting how those play out. Transportation, 574 was the budget amount last year. We had a preliminary of 626,000. The recommendation I'm coming to you with is for $600,000. So that's $26,000 less than the preliminary that we asked for. My reasoning is this. Last year, we built the 15% excess of what our expenditure projection was going to be to cover our reserves, protested taxes, that type of thing. We knew that we had about $31,000 in unreserved fund balance reappropriated. Tried to match that number. Unreserved fund balance means taxes that were paid the last year that did not get spent and are above and beyond our fund reserve will roll over to the next year and not be taken out of the tax base. Okay, so that $30,000 essentially will take off of the top what the expenditures are. The taxpayers won't pay that because they've already paid that amount. So we would be asking for, well, I'll go back. We had roughly in excess of about 50,000 this year. And from my review of it, last year was a real heavy year in protested taxes after the increase in property values. This year was not nearly as much. So that's the difference that I'm noticing in why our reserved, our fund balance reappropriated was higher. We kept our expenditures to strictly routes, and the only employee was the person who did some reporting for us. Technically, you put some of my salary in there as well. We kept it very clean this year as far as expenditures go. Routes and that one employee, we didn't have any additional gas spikes or anything like that we had to pay for. So we have about $50,000 that is going to be reappropriated. This year's increase for expenditures is about $48,000. So I don't think it would be prudent to ask for 15% excess to keep that reserve in place. I think that 10%, as I kind of projected, will get us through the 3 years where we have the 10, 9, and 8% increases, and then we go to CPI plus 2%, I believe. Does that sound? Yeah. If we can manage that unreserved fund amount and keep it not out of line, we should be able to hit those years where we have a more lenient increase and be able to keep the tax amount down. So last year, I believe we had an increase of about 3 mils. This year with those amounts, we would be looking at a 0 mil increase if we go with a 10% excess of what our expenditures are. So that's what I'm proposing at the $600,000. It'd be $26,000 less than what we projected, but it's also going to, with our fund reserve reappropriated, have an increase of 0 mils. So we will, I'll show you that down below as well. Tuition is, go for it. Anybody that, by the way, I'll roll through this as fast as I can because this is how I think about it. So please interrupt.
Does that include all transportation games and everything?
No, so that is not allowed to be taken out of the transportation budget. So that is completely different. We take that out of Impact 8. That's in that other file that I gave you with the 226 or the Impact 8 expenditure lines. The increase on that is roughly $30,000 because of the increase in the per mile. You can see that over historically, $30,000 to $40,000, I think. So, but that is separate. Okay. Go for it. Yeah.
So the 9% increase would be more, but so when we projected it in March there and did the 626, that was probably figuring the full 9%.
That was figuring, that was figuring the full 9% increase, plus I had it built in to cover the reserves 15% above. But our reserves have stayed steady, and because of that, we haven't had to refill them. And I'll show you what that means when I show you retirement. And since we haven't had to refill them, basically we didn't overcharge the tax base last year, but there's an excess of tax payment that we're sitting on that is taking away from this year's increase. So yeah, I don't think it's prudent to ask for the full 626,000 because we'll be in the same boat next year where we'll be looking at,
you need to be careful because you can't let it roll for too many years, or if it sits too long, it's use it or lose it. It's not every year, but we have lost a considerable amount of our reserves 1 year where we had built up a lot in transportation, and it was taken basically
35%. Our taxpayers had funded our reserves up to 35%, which was always state statute, or at least the county statute. They changed it to 20%, and the county just took that off the top. And that was our local tax basis money that the county used for their purposes.
But this
So-
2-year strategy is really even it out.
I believe that after next year, from projecting this, if we keep this at about a 10%, we're going to see our mills be much lower than what we projected, and we're going to even out for the last 2 years, where we're going to have a pretty even mill ask towards the end of this contract. So,
Because I've started a shallow dive into our cost per eligible rider, just to see how we compare to other districts.
Yeah.
But it just taking some time. I don't
Yeah.
know at the time, but,
right,
and once we get it, that'll be maybe in a committee meeting or something.
absolutely. Or you can definitely, I'll take a look at that with you as well.
Sure.
It's something that I've started to try to look at with a couple of other school districts as well. You're not wrong. It's a tougher thing to try to project than you think it is, because you have to find school districts that maybe want to go half and half, or, school districts that are of our size that have transportation needs that are similar. And so, yeah, it's an interesting dive for sure. But I think that with where we're at, I'm very confident next year at 10% that we'll be able to we'll have an increase in expenditures, but we're going to have a 0 mill increase this year. And I think that was something that we had been very aware of as this contract had worked itself forward. So I think that that's important for us to be able to tell everybody if we approve this today. Tuition, once again, I'm a year off on this. Apparently, we're not asking for money from other districts until next year. So we started with $101,000 in the budget last year. We prepped for $125,000 this year, not knowing what our out of district was going to be. We don't have to ask for it until next year. They're going to bill us, and then we go back and ask for the money from the taxpayers. So we're going to match at 101. Our recommendation is 101, which is supported by our special ed calculator, our 5 most tedious students, I guess you would say. Using the state special ed calculator, it calculates out to about $113,000 that we could request from permissive mills. Over the last, I don't know how many years, we've always been right around 101,000. The recommendation is to match that, because we know there's going to be increase next year. However, there is $12,000 there that is left out there that you guys could vote to increase that by, if you so chose to, basically supported by the state calculator. There's also meat on the bone there if we ever want to look at how many more sped students we could actually qualify for. But in the past, we've always been very cognizant of what we're charging our taxpayers with our mills. So that is informational. I think for this year's purposes, 101 is the recommendation. And like I said, it's up to your discussion when we get there. Retirement. This is a whole different one. So if you look at your fiscal year 24, please, you'll notice as you go across to retirement, in our unreserved amounts, so we were able to keep 20% as a reserve. In our unreserved amount, there was 74,000. And if you go to 25, our unreserved amount goes to 0, and we actually dipped into our reserves. Last year, our expenditures in Title I, in retirement, were about $626,000. Throw in your protested taxes and whatnot, and that's how you get that reserve. We're going to have to increase our retirement fund to cover this. Next year, we have about $636,000 projected in expenditures. My reasoning for that is probably over the last couple of years, we had a lot of that stuff running through grants, ESSER, Title, and the likes of those, that then came back over to the county retirement pool. On top of that, there's a request from the Missoula Co-op for $18,988 exactly to fund their retirements that they can't pass through OPI grants this year. So they're asking the districts to fund that. Is that your understanding of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Each district that amount, or that's the total?
That's our amount. Each district has an amount that comes through as
And
a,
we have the most students in the co-op of any other school, so we bring the most in, but we probably we bring the most money to the co-op, so consequently, we probably also get hit the hardest for things like retirement, which doesn't make it, we bring the most, but we also probably hit the most, so.
How many schools in the co-op?
I have,
It's Western Montana.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty much Potomac all the way to St. Regis, all the way to Rodale.
And sharing the specialist is kind of the main
Yeah.
function of the co-op.
We don't have to hire our own psychologist, speech, et cetera, psychologist,
a lot of that funding goes through the IDA
physical
grants.
therapist.
Yeah, so they go through OPI every year and they request that funding, and then it's a weird process. Some think it looks like laundering a little bit, but it's a weird process where they ask for the money, they send us a check in and we pay them back, right? And so this year they're not allowing that to be done with the retirement. So we need to request that from our taxpayers.
15 schools.
15 schools.
15?
15.
Now, the changes from the preliminary will be $59,000. However, if you look across on that budget report sheet again, the second to last column and the last column are your property tax requirements and your mill levies. That's grayed out because it's not distributed tax base, it's distributed countywide. So that decision can be made with knowing that that's spread across the county as far as employees go. So the next couple are pretty simple. Adult ed, straightforward. We asked for 13.8. When I filled out Mayfair's with our amount of reserves, it came up to our max being 15,438. Change from the budget's only roughly $1,500 over last year. But the change to the taxpayers is going to be extremely minimal. So we'll be able to maximize that and be way less than a mil. The flex fund, this one is one that's funded by the state for the that's not transition, what's it called? I told Tony, I told you earlier.
Which one?
The flex fund is the, what we spend the flight simulators, what's that grant called?
Oh, Montana Advanced Opportunities?
Montana Advanced Opportunities. So Montana Advanced Opportunities is funding that one for roughly 39,000. We had 1,800 left in our reserves, so our max budget there would be, 53,268.67. That one's really simple. All of that is plugged in for us in Mayfair, so that one has no additional information. Building reserve is interesting. I know in the past we've talked about whether or not they're going to fund it, how long it's going to happen. I did notice a trend this year. We had $220,000 last year as our budget. I thought we'd project around 214. We're actually closer to $180,000. And the way that works is we can ask for up to 20 mils, but we've had the practice the last few years of asking for the maximum amount that we can to maximize the state major maintenance portion coming from the Coles Fund, right? So that amount is roughly, if I look down at the bottom of this, I have it in here. 84,990 would be the max amount that we would want to ask for, but we have to add our reserves in there. Last year, our reserves were about $135,000. This year, our reserves are $95,000. The difference is the intercap loan interest rate is 6.6%, and it's on a flexible rate, right? So in 2020 and 2021, we had a 0.5%, and we paid almost zero interest. Now that's starting to eat up that reserve that we have. So it'll be definitely something to monitor going forward. But hopefully rates will go back down. It'll adjust in February, and we'll kind of get back to where we were when the whole thing started.
Does that have a cap, or is it just flexible depending on the market?
Yeah, it's flexible depending on the market as far as I know. I don't think it's like they're capping it at 10 or anything like that. That does not have a prepayment penalty. So that's something to consider in the future, but that's going to take some flexibility. And once we get through with some of these building projects, to start to consider that as a payoff as well as other things. So anyway, that's a change in about $34,000 less, and that's all in our reserves.
Do I remember that the 20 mils, the goal was to make the intercap loan payment with
So
proceeds?
we have made the intercap loan payment with what comes from that. However, we have never maxed out the 20 mils. It's generally cost us between 5 and 7 mils because we take advantage of that state maximum amount. And when you go into Mayfairs, you can kind of mess around and see how many mils do you have to commit your district to get the maximum from the state. For us, that amounts to $29,000. If we commit to $29,000, we get the maximum 54,000, 55,000, whatever it was, 890, yeah, 990, to that will come from the state. If we go over that state amount goes down, right? If we go under that state amount goes down. So there's just the magic number where you can maximize that. And as far as our budgeting has gone for the last how many years, we've taken advantage of that. So
The value of the mill went up.
yes, and I can show you that in the next one.
Okay.
Yes, I planned on sharing that with you, kind of just show you how the process is done. Let's go down real quick. $239,000 down below general budget is what we asked for property tax requirements last year. This year, it's only $195,000. The difference is the state funded their portion due to, CPI index increases, whatever they had negotiated. But we saw a decrease in A and B. So that's why we only see a $10,000 increase overall, is because with less A and B, we're asking for about $43,000 less tax from our general population. Good news that you can tell everybody out and about, but also not great news when we're looking to accomplish some of the things that we want to accomplish in paying our teachers and whatnot when we have requests. We're not paying as many taxes, but we also don't have as much money. So that's all due to, as far as I can tell, that's all due to the decrease in enrollment, because the state funding, actually, you can look at it right now. Look between fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, go over to column G. 24, you see they funded basically $3.5 million. In 25, they're funding $3,554,000. So roughly an increase of $54,000. We have a decrease of $43,000 in taxes. That's the $10,000 increase that we have overall. So state funding went up, local tax went down.
And you use a 5-year average to get to A and B number.
They're now allowing 5-year average.
Used to be 3, right?
Used to be 3, which does help us, but also, the trend for 5 years has been negative. Yeah.
Every year.
Yeah, the big years are starting to cycle themselves out now. So that's kind of the concern there. If you go down to transportation, we asked for roughly $412,000 in tax requirements. This year, we're going to ask for about $419,000. That difference is that $50,000 that's unreserved, reappropriated, covers the expenditures. The extra $6,000, when you go from $574,000 to $600,000, your 20% reserve increases by about $6,000. So that's the extra amount built in. A little more than $1 million, right? With the change in taxable value, it becomes, I think, pretty even, almost even tax requirements to what we asked for last year.
Do you anticipate being able to do that next year with the 8% increase?
I have worked it out that if we don't have protested taxes, we should come back in around between 30 and 40. And the expenditure side will be about 45 next year. So we should be close. Yes. I've tried to pencil it to us being able to get to the last 2 years. And
There's a ways out there or something.
right. But I'm projecting that it's an effort. Yes, I'm efforting to make that happen. But once again, like I said, the reason why we have those excesses built in there is because sometimes when we see a big spike like that, the protest taxes go up and we don't get funded the total amount that we need to make sure we pay all those expenditures. So, tuition, once again, that's pretty straightforward. If you go with 101,000, you're only going to see a change of about $1,400. Adult ed is about a $500 increase, and down to building reserve, you're looking at about an $880 decrease, I believe, from last year, because they're not funding the state measure maintenance as much, but we're required just a little bit more from actually, these are tax requirements. We're required to pay $880 more this year to maximize that state major maintenance. So, I'll go to mill levy trends really quick because Stan asked about this.
And there's no figures under the retirement there because that is not funded by the state, or is that?
Yeah, that's not a change to
Okay.
ours directly, right? It is a change to the counties, and I'm sure I'll have a discussion with Carolyn, and probably some county commissioners, but I have all of the work to back it up that shows what the requirements are going to be, and outside of that, I think there's not a lot that they're going to be able to do. So this one right here shows that our taxable value went. It still shows 329 because I had to re-update it. It should be 5392. That's a transposed number. So we went up from 5.341 to 5.392. So it evened out quite a bit from last year's extreme jump. You can see that by our nifty little chart or graph that we have there. That line starts to straighten out. Point out once again that those mills, because of the value jump last year, are less than our pre-bond amount that we were asking our district to pay no levies. So I'm confident that we've managed these proportionally to be able to ask for the least amounts possible, but there's spots where you can ask for more if you'd like. One last one I will go to here and just show you some grants.
And because of all the building that you see going on right now, you anticipate that taxable value number to go up.
I would, but it's
They're
gonna
big
be
buildings.
it's going to be also when they decide, usually every 2 years, they go to the state and ask for a reassessment, right? And so usually about every 2 years, that's when you'll see your major tax spike. So I don't think it's over for Montana. I think it's starting to flatten out a little bit, but yeah, we're gonna see some of that. And there's more buildings going up on the properties in our community. So I think you'll start to see that spread out. The problem is not all of those buildings have kids in them.
Yeah.
If they had kids in
Get
them,
on the
then we
bus.
would be not having these discussions, right? So last year, Title VI, Title VII was 67,000. This year, they're funding 55,000. So we're gonna have a decrease of about $12,000. That difference will be, those expenditures will go into impact aid, right? Title I, 518,000. It's gonna drop to 504. That difference, we're going to be able to play with that one a little bit more. We have one less title teacher, correct? But anything that's in excess of that, those expenditures will go to impact aid. So in lieu of us not cutting expenditures, we're looking at, if revenues don't fix, these things will all have to budget or go into that impact aid budget. Aware grant was funded last year. We don't have a number yet this year. We're confident that it's going to be funded. Okay. Pre-employment transition services, we bill per student, 9,300 last year. We've been able to bump that up in the past. Not necessarily sure what we'll be looking at next year.
It'll be more, but it doesn't help with the salaries.
Yeah. Medicaid is billable per kids that need that straight one-on-one referral. Some of our students do. We lost one that was a major billing factor, so that number might go down, but that is, in unison with our office sending that out to get that money back in.
Back in the day, was it Cedar Creek that we had a contract with, or?
Kind of different. Medicaid billed. It was Cedar Creek. We had the contract, but you're talking about AltaCare. They were built in, and they did it for themselves. Basically, they were in our school, but they billed their own Medicaid. This is just for our Medicaid students, which is separate from
You don't have
the
AltaCare anymore.
AltaCare. Yeah, no, they got washed up. They're not even in the state anymore.
Yeah.
They're gone. I mean, they're like, so that's when we tried to do and that's one of the big shortages across the state right now is mental health. No one's been able, there's a few I think they've tried in Polson, they have a facility up there, but without a facility close by, it's tough. Yellowstone clubs, not Yellowstone Club. No, they're not moving in.
Also,
But Yellowstone Club, not the Yellowstone Child, but they're the next up and comer for Alta Care. They're expanding, but not quickly.
Gear Up has not been funded yet. We're not necessarily sure what that funding is going to look like either. We've heard ramblings of there are going to be cuts in that. So we don't necessarily know what that's going to be yet.
The last email we got was end of August, early September.
So, but also not something that you're going to vote on anyway. It's a grant, but it's good to know that these things, that this is kind of what the current climate is, right? Carl Perkins, we saw an increase. And then the one last thing, I won't even pop it up because it was really long, but I shared with you guys that impact aid budget. Projected, I used 3-year averages. I used a 9% increase based on what we saw for inflationary costs and maintenance in some of those areas. And we came out to expenditure budget of about 1.29. I believe last year we made revenues of about 1.24. So that one is right now budgeted 1 year in, 1 year out. I would consider it the tipping point, whereas if we have any unexpected expenditures, we're going to be into deficit spending. Conversely, if we have any changes in revenue calculations or funding of that type, it'll fix itself. But we're right now at that amount of 1 year in, 1 out, 1 year in, 1 year out. We do have the building project in there, so there's a little bit of room there, but we also built in our projection for salaries and those types of things. So all of those need to be taken into consideration when we're making the decisions that we do. I would then say lastly, before I'll ask you if you have any questions, if you go back to your 24-25 budget reports, down at the bottom, you will see in the very far right corners what the mills will be. Last year, we were looking at 146 mills. This year, we're at 138. If you look at transportation, 77. It's 77 again this year. We saw a decrease from 44 to 36 in the general fund. We've explained why that is. And then the bonds are holding the same. So I'll take questions. The mill value is 5,982. Right on. Just right at 6,000.
This is kind of the big picture, but we had mentioned a meeting or two ago about breaking it down and giving like the IT person X amount for his budget.
If you go to the very bottom of that spreadsheet that I sent you in your email, the IT, so that whole email is every department, every line item broken down for the next year in impact data. Mr. Nesper is very happy that he received the budget amount that he didn't work with this year.
And a lot of that's coming out of impact aid.
All of that.
Yeah, because it can't come out of
Yeah. Basically, our operations are all built into impact aid. Our salaries are all built into our general budget and our grants. And there's very little elsewhere, so we have to run our operations out of impact aid. And we're lucky that we have that.
Yeah, because overall, statewide schools try to use only 80 to 90% of the general fund
It's
for
shifted
salaries.
probably about 90-10, but the general rule when I first started 15 years ago was 80-20 in the general budget, 20% operations, 80% salaries. We are fortunate that we have impact aid, but yeah, we would
Do
be
you think
asking-
all the impact aid schools use 100% of their general for salaries?
I'd have to ask them. I couldn't tell you, but I don't think that that's probably the
I'm
case.
just trying to see if we were a little heavy. And because we got 100% coming out of the general fund, we've got 100,000 the salaries for out of the tuition. Now we're dipping into impact aid about 200,000,
Probably about 260.
260. It just seems like, are we
We're
inching
heavy.
towards a payroll crisis or?
We're heavy.
Yeah, because they don't recommend taking salaries out of impact pay just because it's not guaranteed it's gonna be there every year. It always has been and probably always will be.
Yeah, and so I will say that this year they funded, I believe, 90%, maybe even 100% in their first two payments. And then they funded them pretty quickly. But in the past, we've had those take up to 3 years to get full amount. So you don't ever know what the actual amount is until
And that
few
could be
years later.
Responsibility saved us a year. Let's set it that way. If we didn't have savings at impact aid, we would have had to have made cuts for this year.
So that's kind of why I pointed out the tipping point. Like we're at that spot. We have this year to take a look at a lot of the things and figure out what is going to be the future of our expenditure process. And luckily, you guys are the decision makers.
Is it, maybe this, have anybody signed up for the Harmony to add some AD people? Yeah, or it's too early? No Harmony signees?
Not many. I think we've got one. We have one.
One-ish in high school.
Didn't get the 100.
Well, it's an ish because she wants to do some
Some other
career
stuff.
classes, and so then I'm like, well, why don't you just come here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had one, I think we got tonight, might have fully back, which is count as two, right? So, and we had one other, so we had two here tonight.
I was talking to my brother, he retired from Kenai, Alaska, we call them boroughs and some counties up there, and they said they've been doing that, call it Kenai Connect for like 15 years, and it was a very popular program. So if you ever know of an administrator in Alaska, it's going on up there and has been for quite a while. But I don't know how they draw them in, but they have like
Up
Russian
there, they've got so
Orthodox.
much remote, they probably makes a lot much more sense to,
Yeah, some homeschool and they like hockey, so they come to play
yeah,
hockey.
we're trying.
Mhm.
So I would entertain questions.
You all done?
Yeah. Anything else I think I can answer off of that? If there are none, you guys don't have a discussion. The budget consideration is listed there. Like I said, I gave you the recommendation and the, background of why we're looking at what we are. So if you don't have any changes, yeah, there you go.
Hey, the thing you said is, like, really difficult time deciphering that.
Unreserved fund balance reappropriated.
Yeah, all those things. I mean, just reading that spreadsheet across and trying to figure out. Look at your budget item for school board gifts.
Oh, and the big one?
Yeah.
Good catch. The school board has, in coding, if you look over, you notice that there's like 3 numbers, 2 numbers, 3 numbers, 4 numbers, 3 numbers. So everything that I do has to have a whole system of coding that goes in, right? If it doesn't match properly with the state, it'll be rejected in my trustees report, which is due 5 days ago. But it requires our passing the budget first before you can submit it. So we worked through that. There is a line for board of trustees. We could definitely run that to superintendent's budget. But at Christmas time, when there's gift cards, we code it to the board of trustees because we feel that that is your goodwill going out towards the
Not for you.
not me. Yeah, so it's not for buying you gifts, and if you're asking, we haven't bought any board members gifts.
I told you. on that.
But if you want some, you guys make that
Right here.
decision. But yeah, that's the coding for that, and it definitely could be moved elsewhere, but we feel that that's from you guys. So.
Do we get money from, say, I'm just using this as an example, from Arlie and Charlotte for softball? Does that really contribute to that?
Yes, they do.
So
It
what I
depends.
read here is only part of what goes into that.
Yes,
Is what we contribute.
right.
Same with wrestling with co-op.
All the co-ops have an agreement. Generally, what I'll do is I'll take that money and I will put that into the activity fund to help pay for referees and whatnot in those sports, but it doesn't cover It doesn't cover what we pay out in coaches and transportation and insurance and whatnot, so.
I added up Mr. Grants, under plant services, disposal and landfill fees are $13,000.
Every year we have to pay a lump sum to the,
Solid waste.
waste, and it's about $12,000.
Yeah.
So,
But that's listed under 3 different
Okay.
line items.
perfect. You ready for the next explanation? That's a lot of fun, and why this is the first year we've had a budget. The 226 budget is actually legible. A few years ago, they required us to break down all of those costs based on a per student. So I was breaking them down by our school. So 127 kids in the high school, we would code it to an organization number 1, which meant that service, which was district-wide, would be broken down into 3 sections. 1 for the elementary, 1 for the middle school, 1 for the high school. They have since loosened that up a little bit, but a few years ago, what used to be probably a 16-page budget turned into a 84-page budget because of that requirement. And it was really difficult to track where your salary lines were, where your supply lines were, because each of them had to be, if they were school-wide, had to be distributed per student. And that's a requirement by the legislation to make sure that all students are being treated equitably.
One final question.
Yes.
About this. Line item 223, which is,
I'm not even gonna look. I'm
No,
just gonna
but,
look from
yeah.
memory.
it's, it's a librarian salary.
Salary item?
It's line item 224.
Read me the numbers next to it.
Well, there aren't. That's what I'm kind of curious about.
Might be easier to come in and ask.
Yeah, I don't want to drag it out here. I was just kind of curious about that.
If it was, it shouldn't have been. It would probably be a miscoding. But yeah, it was, as far as salaries go, I'm fine.
So with the yellow, that's the areas that are funded.
The yellow are areas that are, funded, budgeted for. Yes,
Like
yes.
this, that's what's budgeted for. So it's a
Yeah.
line item. Oops.
If it's in the past, there's a
Yes, it's been budgeted in the past, but it's not budgeted current.
Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, so if you scroll over the other way, in 2021, there was a budget line item for it, but it's currently, there's no budget line item for it. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's why there's still a code for it.
I
Because
ran it for the last.
he's showing the last 3 years trends, trying to show the increase or the allocation.
And the reasons why those items in the yellow
Or where they're at.
are where they're at.
I just want to comment on the permissive levies there in March. We shouldn't get too excited because they have a chance of coming down in August.
Yes, I mean,
So
if you look at it historically, like last year, remember when we had the issue with transportation where we hadn't,
We didn't want to show our cards.
we didn't want to show our cards, that one went up. But the whole March, it's a homework assignment, right? We've been told that we have to do it, but at that point, we're definitely not ready to project any of those items, especially coming down the end of the year, because a lot of times that's the most expensive time for us, trying to close everything out. So at that point, I mean, my confidence level in that is usually very minimal. But it's a homework assignment, so we have to turn it in to get credit and then put it in the paper. So,
But
yes,
really now's the time when you know the value of the mill and
correct.
stuff. It's-
And our end of year balances, which we don't know at that time, how things are going to flow forward, and by the end of the year, what our expenditures are. We're projecting a lot of that stuff.
Reserve amounts.
Yeah.
And community or parental choice, the whole in district, out of district, that isn't gonna hit us this year. That is gonna hit everyone next year, which you'll read the article we had in the paper a year ago, is truly a mobility tax on property owners that will not help or hurt most districts.
So you'll know the number, the money just won't change hands.
It'll change, it's all gonna change hands. It's all
Yeah,
gonna be
you'll know
your
the
money.
number now.
We'll know the number and we'll actually have to pay the number.
Next year.
So we'll make a payment for that in December and in May, I believe. But then we won't ask the taxpayers for the funding for it until the following year. So it is in arrears where we will actually be asking for a direct number based on the tracking of those students.
It's gonna mean very little to schools, and it's purely a mobility tax for property owners. That's the truth, and I said it publicly, so.
This first one will be interesting to see what the trends look like.
And we've got multiple tracking sheets that we're working on right now, just to kind of get an idea of even students that were missing, right? Like, it's kind of good to know these things. Yeah,
Money
man,
in,
we-
money out.
We got another meeting and we're already 40 minutes over, so if you guys are ready to roll.
I'll make the motion to approve the St. Ignatius School District number 28, the budget for the 24-25 year as presented.
I'll second.
Been moved to second. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the 24-25 budget as presented?
Thank you. I will probably stay after and submit that tonight because it's due.
Okay.
Right now.
And then, so meeting adjourned for 7:42.
Yep, and roll into
On to the next
one,
one.
guys.
Okay.
Jesse, what do you need? Jesse needs 2 minutes.
There's water in the back room.